the Jewish people never minimized the personal joys of marriage, but they also emphasized the responsibility of having children and building a God-fearing family. What does that mean, a God-fearing family? The day that we live in, to recognize that there is a God, that we're responsible to Him, that we're answerable to Him, is the number one project in any family. God would honor him by making Jacob the father of 12 tribes of Israel. But the fact that 4 different women were involved in building this family created Jacob one of the greatest problems of his entire life. The man who grew up in a divided, competitive home would himself create a divided and competitive family. Isn't it an amazing thing how that we make the same mistakes that our parents made? And a lot of times we're right in the mold of mom and dad on how to raise kids. Virginia grew up in a family that was divided. Mom's first husband died, had 2 children, married again. Later on, we found out that when she dated Virginia's dad, that she left out one little detail, that she had 2 children that were back with her mother. Amazing the complications that take place in dating and learning each other's background. Did you wake up after being married and find out that you were married to a whole family? Did you wake up after being married for a little while and find out that he's got some weird brothers and sisters, or she's got a strange set of siblings that run around? Virginia grew up with this idea that mom and dad both worked. They had their own cars. They had their own checkbooks. They had their own bills divided. I grew up in a family that my mother never worked. My dad brought home the money. He gave my mom whatever it took to run the household, and he did whatever he had to do with the rest of it. Totally different. Virginia grew up in a country setting, on a farm, where they raised food. I grew up where you went to the A&P and got whatever you wanted. Many of you don't even know what it is anyway. Atlantic and Pacific grocery store. I grew up where if you wanted a gallon of milk, it came out of a carton. Generally, it wasn't plastic back then. It was either glass or it was cardboard. She grew up learning that you wanted a gallon of milk, it came out of a metal jug and then into a glass jug, and if you followed it back the other way, you wouldn't drink it if you saw where it came from. Totally different. When we first got married, I went down and took pictures of him milking a cow. They thought he was the strangest guy in the world. Why would you want to take a picture of a cow? I'd never seen one before. Totally different. Totally different. Building a family. Coming together in unity. Recognize, by the way, Virginia and I have had a wonderful 31 years together. I'm anticipating another 31 years if I live so long. We've got 2 wonderful children that have positives and negatives about both of them. You just see more, never mind. But Jacob ends up with these 2 sisters at odds with one another. Both of them an equal wife in the family. You talk about stress. Guys, you know how much difficulty it is in taking care of one of them. To think that you double that. In the King James it says that Jacob hated Leah but loved Rachel. The little word hate here in verse number 31 doesn't mean that he abused her. It simply means that he loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. And that Rachel was more attentive, she was more affectionate, she was the love of his life. The fact that Leah bore Jacob 6 sons and a daughter indicates that he fulfilled his marital duties toward her, but she knew in her heart that he belonged to my sister. And the Lord knew that as well. And so he blessed Leah with conception. It's a paradox. While Jacob was working these 14 years to pay for these 2 wives, that only one of the wives were going to bear him children. And Jacob knew that children were a blessing from the Lord. And it was God who gave Isaac to Abraham and Sarah, and gave Jacob and Esau to Isaac and Rebekah. Not only did Laban tell him what to do, but he also, with Jacob's own 2 wives, made an agreement that he knew nothing about until it came home from that weary flock tending day. Rachel and Leah treated Jacob like a servant. Who got to be with him what night? He became a pawn in the family. Bartering back and forth. Certainly not part of God's plan. But as you read here, Genesis 29, beginning in verse 31, and going all the way through Genesis 30, verse 21, you find the 12 tribes of Israel. And they're all listed for you. And Leah named her firstborn Reuben, which means, "See, I have a son." Since every Jewish father wanted sons, Leah was certain that this baby would cause her husband to love her. Only one problem. She was wrong. The second boy comes along, Simeon, meaning one who hears, and suggests that Leah had been talking to God about her misery. Years later, Jacob would replace Reuben and Simeon with Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, of taking over the heads of the tribes. They were replaced because Reuben was guilty of sexual sin, and Simeon had participated in a massacre of the Shechemites. The third son that comes along was Levi, a name that she gave to this boy, which means attached. For Leah had still had this inner hope that Jacob would love her for her son's sake. The birth of her 4th son seemed to bring new joy to her life, and she called him Judah, which comes from the Hebrew word meaning praise. And after a period of barrenness, Leah was enabled by God to bear 2 more sons, Issachar, which means reward of wages, and Zabal, which means honor. Almost as a sidebar, almost as a little footnote in Scripture, in Genesis chapter 30, verse number 21, sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Diana. It's interesting that when Rachel finds out that she's barren and can't have children, the culture kicks in. And she says, "Here, take my maidservant, Bilhah, and you sleep with her, and you have children by her, and when she has children, I'm going to adopt them as my very own." And Jacob does. And there she has the first son. And his name is Dan. And the second son, Naphtali, which means my struggle. You go to the fact that finds out that Leah can't have any more children, and so she sees what Rachel does in taking the maidservant, does the same thing, and in the seemingly the culture of the day, I'm sitting here going, Jacob, where is your brain? Where is your mind, Jacob? And he goes along with it and has a 4th wife. They named the first boy Gad, meaning luck has come. And then the second son, Asher, meaning happy or blessed. And finally, Rachel conceives and gives birth to a son in whom she names Joseph. God blessed her and answered her prayers.